everyone. Welcome to the Chicago Report. I'm Brett Pagansky, filling in for the vacationing Paris Schutz tonight. So we have a very packed show, from new proposed state legislation to investigate Illinois ties to Jeffrey Epstein, to two lawyers breaking down a major Supreme Court case over gun ownership and marijuana use. Plus, we have the latest on the deadly conflict in Iran. But first, some news closer to home. Chicago could once again be the host of the Democratic National Convention. So the DNC reports Chicago is one of the frontrunners to host the convention in 2028 and even 2032. But the committee says Atlanta, Boston, Denver, and Philadelphia are also under consideration. So Chicago hosted the last convention in 2024 for the very first time since 1996. And the U.S. death toll in Iran now stands at 6. And President Donald Trump spoke just moments ago about how long there could be military action in Iran and the potential for more U.S. casualties.
An Iranian regime armed with long-range missiles and nuclear weapons would be an intolerable threat to the Middle East, but also to the American people. Our country itself would be under threat.
And joining us now is a friend of the Chicago Report, Matteo Farzaneh, who was born in Iran, spent his childhood in Iran, and he's also a history professor at Northeastern Illinois University. And you're the author of the Iranian Constitutional Revolution. So, Matteo, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Hey, always great to have you here. So you were forced to leave Iran right when Iraq invaded some odd years ago here. You know, you're an Iranian native. You now claim Chicago home. You spent a lot of time in California. How are Iranians responding to the U.S. conflict, or the U.S. invading Iran in this now military conflict?
If we're talking about the Iranian Americans or Iranians who reside here in the United States, the great majority of them support what's taking place right now, which is kind of odd. And that comes out of frustration, out of years of tears, out of years of sadness about what the Islamic Republic was doing and is doing to its own people. So their anger is understandable. But at the same time, the surreal thing about all of this is that we've never had an instance where a group of people that say they love their country, and I have no doubt about that, would like foreign aggression to solve their problem. And that's very problematic by itself.
Especially when you're looking at the history of everything, when the U.S. meddled in 1953 in the election in place of the Shah, and then the Shah came here in the late 1970s to get cancer treatment when he was on vacation. Right. So there was some anger, if you will, around this time. So this isn't the first time since there's been a lot of anger toward the United States. But during that press conference with Secretary Pete Hegseth and the president, there were a lot of unanswered questions that they're expecting a regime change during this whole last 4 or 5 days. I mean, even in the weeks to come. Is that even possible for a regime change in that short a time?
That's what a lot of people, including Iranian Americans, are hoping for. What people need to understand is the Islamic Republic has been practicing for a day like this for a long time. The authoritarian nature of the regime is not like any other in the Middle East or any other place where you take the head of the snake off and the body will give up. Actually, in this case, there's been a lot of contingency plans put in place, not only constitutionally, but by various doctrinal understanding and ideological understanding of how the IRGC, or the Islamic Republic Guards Corps, Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps, in effect, will take over any situation where they see the Islamic Republic as a government might fall. So I think everybody should be ready for a long, drawn-out battle, and I do not see any way that the regime would fall just by the aerial bombing and Israel's aerial bombing that will essentially reach that goal. The only other way would be to have boots on the ground, and I'm not sure if Congress or the American people are ready for that.
And is diplomacy a real potential, or is that even realistic, especially after what happened this past weekend?
Diplomacy is always, I want to stress that, is always a chance for making good. But unfortunately for the United States, you mentioned 1953 coup, where the United States and the British allies, they essentially overthrew the only first democratically related government in Iran for the chance for the monarchy to come back, which is what happened. And then we had the monarchy overthrown in 1979, and Islamic Republic behaved the way it's been behaving ever since then. But then we had the JCPOA, the nuclear agreement that the Obama administration, through very, very difficult times, could get both sides to sign on. And that was only the United States. It was also Iran, P5, which is the 5 Security Council members, plus Germany that signed on to it. And it was historic. I think, as a historian, I think that will come as one of the most significant diplomatic efforts that the United States and the world had engaged in. But unfortunately, for many people, including Americans and Iranians, the Trump administration, Donald Trump, in the first year in his office in 2017, decided to renege on the promise of the Americans, and hence the conservative government in Iran kind of had the moment of "I told you so," that you cannot trust Americans. And Iranians were actually negotiating with Jared Kushner and Witkoff for 3 or 4 times for the past couple of weeks. And they were supposed to meet today, actually on Monday, but then somebody couldn't wait anymore and they started this aggression.
And Matteo, one final question. There's still this fear, though, because we kept hearing that the United States wants to get in another war in the Middle East after what we just had in Afghanistan and Iraq. Iran is a different situation, is a much larger country. Is there a real fear that we could be locked in another war in the Middle East?
Oh, absolutely. If the objective is, and Donald Trump keeps saying there's an objective and we don't know exactly because it comes in piecemeal. If the objective is to take out the regime, then as I said earlier, aerial bombings is not going to make it. What aerial bombings are going to do is going to destroy the country, it's going to create chaos, and if anybody wants like a civil war, pitting people against each other, or if we're going to have American soldiers on the ground, then we're in it for a long term.
Matteo Farzaneh, thank you so much for joining us today, and you're always welcome back here on the Chicago Report.
Thank you, Brett.
All right, hours ago, the House Oversight Committee released hours of closed-door interviews with former President Bill Clinton and former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton as part of the Epstein investigation. So the tapes of the testimony are reportedly 4.5 hours each. So joining us now is State Representative Abdul Nasser Rashid. Representative, you, along with State Senator Mary Edley Allen, introduced a bill this morning to create a governor-appointed commission to investigate Illinois connections to Jeffrey Epstein. So what has been your reaction of the Clinton deposition footage today?
Thank you for having me on. And yes, I joined colleagues, including Senator Guzman, this morning to introduce the Illinois Epstein Files Investigation Act. And my first reaction to the deposition is good. I'm glad that Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton testified. Bill Clinton said that no one is above the law, including and especially presidents, and he's right. So anyone with knowledge of Jeffrey Epstein's network should be on the record under oath. That includes the Clintons and everyone. Survivors have waited for years for powerful people to answer hard questions in a legal setting, and sworn testimony is a meaningful step. But let's be careful to not assume that Congress is actually trying to get to the bottom to the truth here. They are going after the Clintons, but ignoring Donald Trump, ignoring the people who are in their own networks. And so we cannot apply justice selectively just by targeting Trump's political opponents. Donald Trump should testify.
The timing of everything is very interesting on this thing. Do you think this is real accountability, or is there some sort of political strategy of why this House committee decided to release that testimony today?
Is absolutely political for them. And look, let me repeat. I'm glad that the Clintons testified, but why stop at the Clintons? Why are they not reaching out and subpoenaing the president or people in their own networks who are named throughout the Epstein files? They should be testifying. It's important that the public have trust in the bodies that are doing the investigations. And when they do political theater like that, people lose trust. People think that they're simply trying to score political points, which is why it's so important that states step in, because people need to rely on not Donald Trump's Department of Justice, but independent bodies to actually conduct these investigations. And with the Department of Justice failing to do its part, it's time that states step up.
Was very interested in this press conference today when I was listening to you and some of the other advocates who were about creating this Illinois Epstein Files Investigation Commission. Number one, what's your role going to be with the commission? But number two, I never heard of the Illinois connection to Jeffrey Epstein and the sex trafficking ring. What's the possibility that there could be dozens and dozens, if not hundreds of survivors with Illinois ties related to Jeffrey Epstein?
Well, we've seen survivors from different states come forward, from Texas, from New York, from, I believe, a number of states have been publicly reported on as having survivors. It's very conceivable that there are survivors here in Illinois. We don't know how many, and that's partly the point of this effort, is that we need a commission, we need a body that is actually going to look for the truth and that's going to seek accountability. There has been reporting about different Illinois connections, personal and business connections with Jeffrey Epstein, and I'm not prejudging anyone. We want the facts to lead wherever they may. And it doesn't matter how powerful you are, doesn't matter how connected you are. If you've committed a crime and you are subject to Illinois law, you ought to be held responsible. And one of my Republican colleagues already said, oh, Illinois doesn't have the authority to investigate this. Yes, we do. We have the power to investigate any crime committed under Illinois law, and that's what this commission is tasked with doing.
You have to wonder if there's any confidence for anyone to come forward, just given the history. If you've seen a lot of these Jeffrey Epstein documentaries with some survivors in New York, Florida, New Mexico, parts of Europe, saying they had gone to the FBI, they had gone to the DOJ, and somehow it either just got pushed to the side, they felt like they were silenced. But with this new footage from the Clintons released from that House committee, you have to wonder if that's going to be a deciding factor, or if it's going to get more witnesses or survivors to come forward under subpoena.
Well, you know, it's got to be one of the hardest things to come forward for a survivor who, frankly, they've been threatened. They have, you know, it is extremely, extremely heart-wrenching to think about what they're going through, to have to relive the crimes that they faced and the abuse that they faced. And that's why it's extremely important that we center survivors and center supporting them when we do these investigations. They should come forward if they would like to. There's nothing that should compel them to, but if they do, they should be able to do so in a safe way. They should be able to receive trauma-informed support, and that's what this bill provides for those who do come forward. And most importantly, they should trust that this is a process that is actually going to try to achieve justice and accountability. And that's why I think it shouldn't just be Illinois, it shouldn't just be New Mexico. States across the country ought to convene commissions like this and start looking for any violations of state law, because it's been abundantly clear that Donald Trump's Department of Justice is not interested in going after the Epstein class.
Do you find this to be a breaking point when you have members of Congress like Thomas Massey from Kentucky, Ro Khanna, joining together saying, look, there is bipartisan support to have more transparency into finding out what is in these files and why certain things were left out of the files, and you have to wonder what's going to happen next when it comes to this, and with this new act from Illinois state lawmakers regarding Jeffrey Epstein?
That's exactly right. The overwhelming majority of the American people are sick and tired of powerful people being protected because they know someone, because they're Donald Trump's friend. And I don't care at which party, Democrat or Republican, if you've committed a crime and you're powerful, you're connected, you ought to be held accountable. That's why the congressional subpoenaing of just the Clintons is a farce. Subpoena the Clintons and subpoena everyone else, including your own friends, who are in those files. I do think we're at a breaking point. I think the American people have had enough, and that's why I think it's so important that the states step in and do our part. That's what we do. That's what we do on many issues. When the federal government evades responsibility or abdicates its responsibility, states step in, and it's time for states to step in and investigate the Epstein crimes.
State Representative Abdul Shah Rashid. I know there's going to be a lot of people watching this and what comes of it. So thanks for joining us. All right, when we come back.
Thank you for having me.
Hey, my pleasure. We're going to be talking to two constitutional law experts about a Supreme Court case involving gun owners and drug users. You don't want to miss it. Tonight, the Supreme Court hears an important case involving gun rights. The question before the High Court, should it be a crime for drug users to possess a firearm? So in this specific case that we're talking about, it's about owning guns and using marijuana. So tonight we have Daryl Miller from the University of Chicago Law School, who is an expert on civil rights, constitutional law, and legal history. And he is one of the co-authors of the Positive Second Amendment Rights Regulation and the Future of Heller. And of course, we also have Josh Blackman from the South Texas College of Law, who is an expert on constitutional law and the Supreme Court. He's an adjunct fellow at the Manhattan Institute. His work has been quoted during both impeachment trials of President Donald Trump. So, all right, gentlemen, thanks for joining us. Daryl, I'd love to start with you because we found out today you filed an amicus brief in this case. So we want to find out what it said in that brief and how you ended up getting involved.
Yeah, so as you said, I'm a Second Amendment expert. I teach a course on the Second Amendment at the University of Chicago. And the brief that I filed, along with some other Second Amendment scholars, was essentially saying that there needs to be some ability of legislatures to make categorical decisions about who can or can't have guns, and that not every single decision about who can or can't have guns has to be what's known as sort of as applied or for a specific individual. For example, we can imagine a scenario where there would be some kind of, really bright prodigy that was 7 years old that would be perfectly capable of having a firearm, but the law just simply doesn't allow 7-year-olds to have firearms or to sell firearms to 7-year-olds, no matter how precocious this one 7-year-old would be. And that is the type of categorical decisions that legislatures need to be able to make, and things about drugs tend to have that same character.
All right, Josh, I want to bring you in on this one. So about 60 years ago, the Supreme Court said it's illegal for someone to own a gun if they use illegal drugs on a regular basis. But, alcohol was left out of that, yet someone who uses alcohol isn't banned from owning a gun, yet someone who uses marijuana would be banned under this. So, alcohol use has evolved since the founding fathers, and We heard the term drunkard used during this Supreme Court hearing today. You have to wonder how that's going to impact this Supreme Court ruling, given the fact that the use of alcohol has really evolved, and same with marijuana, because that's become more regular, especially with Gen Zers.
So alcohol is not illegal, but it can be used in a way that is too much. People will become addicted to alcohol. They become so drunk that it affects their ability to go about on a day-to-day basis. Marijuana is also legal under federal law. It can be used in moderation. It can be used to the point where someone gets addicted, or it can be used to the extent where it so impairs your ability that you can't go about your day-to-day function. Today, the Supreme Court, the justices are really grappling with this idea of addiction versus using it in habitual fashion and how it affects your lifestyle. A lot of the justices don't want to get into the fine line drawing because, okay, maybe marijuana is fine. What about PCP? What about heroin? What about meth? They seem somewhat uncomfortable with drawing those lines. Justice Barrett used an example, Ambien. What happens if a person takes her husband's Ambien pill once in a while? Would that be grounds for disarming them? And keep in mind, this is a felony to have a felon in possession of a firearm if they use these drugs. So the justices were really struggling, and it was sort of the opposite. Sometimes you think that the conservatives are very much in favor of gun rights, but here we almost saw that. So the court's conservatives are like, well, we like gun rights, but not for drug users. So there was a little bit of a cognitive dissonance going on at the court today.
And that's an unusual coalition with people who are about marijuana rights, but also gun rights. So you have groups coming together and siding with one another, and other groups who you would think would be siding with somebody else, they're actually siding with the president when it comes to banning certain groups of people for having guns. So you never thought you would have this conversation. Speaking of the president, who signed it as an executive order directing the DOJ to reschedule marijuana from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3, but the thing is that, as we were talking about, marijuana is still against federal law. You have to wonder if that's going to impact how the high court decides to rule on this case, or could they end up deferring to a lower court here?
Well, I think that what's going to happen here is they have to decide the case as the law existed when Mr. Hamani used marijuana, right? So even if Trump tomorrow decides to reschedule it, but I think the justices might also be hesitant to sort of base ruling based on what kind of schedule the drug appears in. So I think this is a tricky case. I think the government had to appeal to the Supreme Court. I think the Supreme Court had to take it because a lower court said this law is unconstitutional. But I don't think this will be an easy one for the justice to resolve. In fact, it may not be a clear majority. Maybe it'll be 2 or 3 different rationales, and that'll be good enough for the court just for now.
All right, Daryl, what say you on this?
Yeah, so just for your viewers, one of the reasons, for example, the issue with drunkards is coming up is because in a 2022 case, the Supreme Court of the United States, in a case called Bruin, said that we know whether a regulation is constitutional only by reference to how historical it is, to have a historical analog. It doesn't need an exact duplicate. And so the only thing that's really available in an environment before, cocaine or methamphetamine is prohibitions on drunkards. So that's why the drunkard stuff keeps coming up. I agree with Josh. I think that there's going to be a fragmented opinion. I think what's really driving a lot of the concern of the court is not necessarily about marijuana users, but that whatever rule they end up saying has the potential to unravel a whole bunch of other regulations. That is, to the extent that somebody gets to say, well, I'm not a habitual user of marijuana, it's not dangerous, and therefore I should be able to have a gun. There's going to be somebody else who's convicted of, some kind of robbery 20 years ago that said, well, that was me 20 years ago, and therefore I shouldn't be prohibited forever from having a gun because I was convicted of armed robbery. And I think what is looming in the background is a concern that the entire regulation about felons, about other persons that are, have mental illness and are institutionalized, basically all of them getting their own bespoke challenge and saying, well, I don't know about those other people, but I should be able to have a gun, and the entire apparatus of regulating guns unraveling.
All right, one final question. If we can go 20 seconds for each of you. We'll start with you, Josh. How does this potentially open up Pandora's box? Because anytime you hear about weakening Second Amendment rights, even if there's something like marijuana involved in this, how could that potentially open up even more court cases?
Well, what's interesting here is that the ACLU brought this case, not the NRA. And this is very much a case people on the left have been looking forward to. So I think the court will try to keep the Pandora's box somewhat closed and say we'll simply defer to Congress when they define that these crimes are dangerous. But as Justice Jackson points out, that's not exactly consistent with the Bruin decision that Darrell mentioned a few moments ago.
All right, Daryl.
Yeah, I mean, I think I sort of agree with Josh, which is, the concern, as I mentioned, is that they have to write an opinion that's going to be used by other persons that aren't users of marijuana, but are users of, cocaine or something else. And like I said before, I think what they're really concerned about is writing it in a way that's tight enough that it preserves, for example, the prohibition on persons convicted of violent felonies still being in place. But it's really going to depend on how they reason through this particular case. So, on one hand, it's a small case. It's an important case. It's about marijuana and drug use and gun possession, but has potential downstream effects to the entire regulatory landscape and throwing into question a lot of regulations that I think a lot of people, including many gun owners, would agree with.
All right, gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us today. All right, we'll be back after the break.